In this series of videos, we're going to be looking at the muscular movements of the heart that lead to a functional heartbeat. So since the heart is a muscle, analyzing the heart is actually relatively simple to do because muscle can only do one of two things. It can contract, in which the muscle fibers pull themselves closer together and make themselves shorter, or it can relax, where the muscle elongates itself and makes itself longer. And of course, because we're dealing with biology, there are technical terms for contraction and relaxation of the heart muscles. So contraction of heart muscles is what we call systole, sometimes pronounced systole. So systole is just a fancy word that means cardiac muscle contraction or myocardial contraction, and the opposite of systole is pronounced diastole or diastole, depending on your pronunciation, which is simply the relaxation of cardiac muscle. And when the muscles of the atria and the ventricles undergo systole and diastole in very specific patterns, we end up with the cycle that leads to a functional heartbeat, which naturally is what we call the cardiac cycle, which generally works in three simple phases. So in this phase, if we assume that the atria and ventricles remain open, which allows blood to enter both the atria and the open valves of the ventricles, in this case, the stage one of the cardiac cycle is when the atria undergo contraction, meaning that the atria have undergone systole. This is what we call atrial systole, while conversely the ventricles relax. And there is a relatively simple reason why, in that blood is filling up in the atria and is going to be transferred into ventricles. So blood moves from the atria into our ventricles, and therefore, if we want to maximize the amount of blood that can fill into ventricles, relaxing the muscular tissue on the walls of the ventricle maximizes the volume of the ventricles and allows much more blood to enter through the atria. And of course, we need to pay attention to the positioning of the valves in order to prevent backflow. But in this case, since blood is flowing from the atria downward into the ventricles, the blood is going to flow through the atrioventricular valves on both sides of the heart. Now, at this point, the atria have basically emptied themselves, and the ventricles are now full of blood, which is ready to be pumped out of the heart, and that's exactly what we see at stage 2. So at stage 2, because atria and ventricular, or atrial and ventricular muscles work opposite to each other, both of the atrial muscles are going to relax, which therefore allows more blood to enter from outside the heart into the atria, while the ventricles undergo contraction, which is what we call ventricular systole, which causes blood to move out of the heart. So here we can see when the right ventricle contracts, it pushes blood out of the heart towards the lungs via the pulmonary artery, and when the left ventricle contracts, it pushes blood out of the heart via the aorta, which is bound for the rest of the body, in which case the atrioventricular valves we can see here are closed because we don't want blood to flow backward up into the atria, but we want to control the flow of blood out of the heart, meaning that it is the semilunar valves that are going to be open at this time to allow blood to flow out the pulmonary artery and aorta, respectively. Now, at this point, the overwhelming majority of the heart is empty because most of the space in the heart is contained within the ventricles, which means that we need to reset the heart and get it ready to undergo the cardiac cycle again, in which case the atria and ventricles resume the rest position, which allows all of the valves in the heart, so we can see that the AV valves here are open so that blood is able to enter the atria and then drain downward naturally because of gravity into the ventricles, getting it ready for stage 1 once again. So here we can see that the atria and ventricles are beginning to fill with blood from outside of the heart, and once the atria are sufficiently in position, the semilunar valves close and the atria contract and push blood downward into the ventricles, beginning the cardiac cycle once again. In the next video, what we're going to look at, now that we've seen the movement of muscles within the heart, in the next video, we're going to look at how the nerve sections of the heart actually regulate atrial and ventricular systole so that the top part and the bottom part of the heart know exactly when they are supposed to contract and when they are supposed to relax.